Hey guys, in today's video, get ready for an intense and transformative story that will move you. Let's meet Finian Royce, a man who faced the darkest death vortex and came back with a shattering revelation. During his near-death experience, he was confronted with his sins, and upon meeting Jesus, his life changed forever. What he saw and felt on the other side will leave you speechless. So before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss any content like this. Now, let's embark on this impressive journey together. My name is Finian Royce, and until recently, I was just another 35-year-old man living in Seattle, leading a life that I considered normal, but which I now realize was empty and purposeless. He worked as a marketing manager at a technology company, earned well, had a nice apartment with a view of the lake, and had been married to Evelyn for 7 years. It seemed like I had everything. But the truth is that something was always missing. I lived a life without faith, completely disconnected from any spirituality. I grew up in a family that didn't care about religion, and I myself never felt the need to seek something beyond what I could see and touch. I thought this was something for weak or naive people who needed emotional crutches to face life. My marriage to Evelyn, which began full of passion and shared dreams, had cooled over the years. We became more roommates than life partners. We talked about bills, work, and vacation plans, but rarely about our deepest feelings or aspirations. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't have the energy or desire to try and fix it. One thing I deliberately ignored was my severe sleep apnea. Evelyn always complained about my snoring and the scary pauses in my breathing at night. I went for tests, and the doctor warned me about the serious health risks, including the possibility of cardiac arrest. But in my arrogance, thought I was invincible. I refused to use the recommended CPAP machine, saying it was uncomfortable and would disrupt my sleep. Deep down, I lived in a state of constant apathy. Nothing really excited me. Nothing seemed to have any real meaning. I would go to work, come home, watch series, drink a little more than I should on the weekends, and repeat everything the following week. It was like I was waiting for something to happen, for something to shake me and make me feel truly alive. Little did I know that this something was about to happen, and that it would be an experience that would completely change my perception of life, death, and everything that exists beyond what our eyes can see. It was a Tuesday night like any other. Evelyn and I ate dinner in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. After watching an episode of some series, we went to bed around 11 p.m. I remember thinking, before falling asleep, that the next day would be just another dull day in my boring life. I fell asleep quickly, as I always did. What happened next, however, was something no dream or nightmare could have prepared me for. At some point during the night, my breathing stopped. It wasn't like other times, when I woke up panting, struggling for air. This time, it was different. I felt a strange sensation, as if something was detaching from my body. Suddenly, I realized that I was floating above the bed. At first, I thought it was a vivid dream, but the clarity with which I saw everything was surreal. I could see my body lying on the bed, motionless, next to Evelyn, who was sleeping peacefully. Moonlight streamed in through the window, softly illuminating the room. Every detail was clear. The books on the bedside table, the digital clock showing 3:17, even a sock thrown on the floor that I had forgotten to put away. The feeling was indescribable. I felt completely free, light as a feather. There was no pain. There were no worries. It was as if all the weights I had been carrying in life had been lifted at once. I moved around the room with just the power of thought, floating up to the ceiling and then down again. I tried to touch Evelyn, to call her name, but my hands passed through her as if I were made of air. My voice made no sound. It was at that moment that fear began to set in. Was I dead? Was this what happened when we died? I looked at my body on the bed. He was pale, motionless. I couldn't see any breathing movement. I wanted to go back, get back into that familiar shell, but I didn't know how. I started to panic, but the panic was unlike anything I had ever felt. It was a deep, existential fear that seemed to come from the very essence of my being. It was then that I noticed something strange happening around me. The room began to grow dark, not as if the lights were going out, but as if reality itself was dissolving. And in the midst of this growing darkness, I saw a black vortex forming, a whirlwind of energy that seemed to want to swallow me. I wasn't ready for what came next. Nothing could have prepared me for the journey that was about to begin, a journey that would take me to the ends of existence and back, forever changing who I was. As I floated in the room, observing my inert physical body on the bed, I began to notice something extraordinary about my new form. It was like I was seeing myself for the first time, but in a completely different way. I looked at my hands and arms, expecting to see the tattoos I had accumulated over the years. The dragon on my right forearm, my mother's name on my left wrist, the tribal symbols on my bicep. To my surprise, my skin was completely clear. There were no marks, no scars, no tattoos. Instinctively, I reached for my left ear, looking for the piercings I'd had since I was a teenager. Nothing. My earlobes were intact, as if they had never been pierced. The same thing happened with the nose ring. It was gone. It was as if I had returned to an original, pure state. My spiritual body, for that was how I understood it now, seemed to be the essence of who I was, stripped of all the modifications and marks that I had accumulated throughout my life. The feeling was surreal. I felt lighter, not just in the physical sense of being able to float, but as if a weight had been lifted from my very existence. The imperfections, the marks of time and experience, everything had disappeared. I also noticed that I did not feel hungry, thirsty, or any physical discomfort. There was no heartbeat to feel, no need to breathe. It was a purely energetic existence, free from the limitations and needs of the physical body. This realization brought with it a mental clarity I had never experienced. It was as if a fog had lifted from my mind, allowing me to see and understand things with stunning clarity. Thoughts and memories flowed with incredible ease, unfiltered by everyday distractions. For a moment, I felt a deep peace. It was as if, for the first time, I was experiencing what it meant to be truly myself, without the layers of identity I had built up over the years. He was no longer Finian the marketing manager, Finian Evelyn's husband, Finian with his tattoos and piercings. It was just me. This feeling of peace and clarity, however, was brief. As I observed my new state, I began to feel a growing strength around me. The black vortex I had noticed before began to expand, its edges getting closer to me. Peace gave way to growing apprehension. Something told me that this pure, free form I was experiencing was now about to be put to the test. The vortex seemed to call to me, not with words, but with an irresistible pull. I tried to resist, holding on to the feeling of lightness and clarity I had experienced, but the strength of the vortex was relentless. I felt myself being pulled toward that swirling darkness, leaving behind the room, my physical body, and everything I knew. As I was drawn into the unknown, a thought crossed my mind. Would this purity I now felt be strong enough to face what was to come? I didn't know the answer, but I was about to find out. The moment I was engulfed by the black vortex is something I will never forget. The feeling of freedom and lightness that I felt moments before was brutally replaced by an overwhelming anguish. It was as if every fiber of my being was being compressed and stretched at the same time. The darkness was total, deeper than any moonless night I had ever witnessed. It wasn't just the absence of light, but it seemed to be a living, pulsating entity that completely surrounded me. I could see nothing, not even my own spiritual form that once glowed with a soft light. The initial silence was quickly replaced by a deafening roar. It was as if thousands of voices were shouting at the same time, but I couldn't make out any words or languages. It was a cry of anguish, fear and despair that reverberated through me. I started to feel like I was falling, but there was no direction reference. It could be rising, falling, or spinning. The feeling of disorientation was complete. Time seemed to not exist in that place. Seconds or centuries could have passed, I couldn't say. As I went deeper into that abyss, I began to feel presences around me. I couldn't see them, but I could feel them. Shadowy entities, charged with a negativity so intense it made my soul shudder. They seemed to feed on my fear and despair, growing stronger with each passing moment. I tried to scream, to call for help, but no sound came out. My voice had been swallowed by the darkness, just like everything else. The feeling of loneliness was overwhelming. I was completely alone, facing terror beyond anything I had ever experienced in my life. Flashes of memory began to appear in my mind. Moments in my life when I had been cruel, selfish, or indifferent. Each memory brought with it a sharp pain, as if I were reliving not only my actions, but also the suffering I had caused others. It was at that moment that I understood. This wasn't just a vortex of darkness, it was a descent into hell. Not the fire and brimstone hell that is so often portrayed, but a personal hell made up of my own failures and regrets. The feeling of doom was absolute. Every wrong choice, every harsh word, every wasted opportunity to do good. Everything weighed on me with an unbearable force. I wanted to go back, fix everything, but I knew it was too late. Despair took over me. I had wasted my life, lived selfishly and empty, and now I was reaping the consequences. The darkness seemed to mock my anguish. The evil presences rejoiced in my suffering. It was then that, at the height of my despair, something unexpected happened. A point of light, tiny but undeniably present, appeared in the distance. It was like a lone star in a pitch-black sky. That point of light, however small it was, brought with it a spark of hope. I didn't know what that light meant, or if it could save me from the torment I was experiencing. But his mere presence was a reminder that, maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance for redemption. As I was suspended in that oppressive darkness, something extraordinary began to happen. It was as if a movie of my life was being projected around me, but not just to be seen, to be experienced again. I began to relive every moment of my existence, from my earliest childhood memories to the most recent events. But it was not a simple memory. I was there, feeling every emotion, every physical sensation, as if it were happening for the first time. I saw myself as a small child, feeling the pure joy of playing in the park with my parents. I could feel the warmth of the sun on my skin, hear the laughter, experience that carefree happiness that I had long forgotten. But then, the scene started to change. I saw myself as a teenager, yelling at my mother in a fit of teenage rage. This time, though, I wasn't just reliving my own feelings. I could feel the pain I caused her, her heart breaking at my cruel words. Guilt and regret consumed me. The scenes continued to play faster and faster. I saw all the times I was selfish, all the opportunities I wasted to help someone, all the moments I chose indifference over compassion. And in each of these moments, I felt not only my own emotions, but also the impact of my actions on others. I witnessed again the day Evelyn told me about her unplanned pregnancy, and I relived the moment we decided to have an abortion. This time, I could feel her internal conflict, the fear, sadness, and physical and emotional pain she experienced. The guilt for not supporting her properly, for prioritizing my career and comfort, consumed me. I saw all the times I ignored Evelyn's emotional needs in our marriage, all the nights I came home late from work without caring about how lonely she felt. I could feel his heart gradually closing, love being replaced by resignation. It wasn't just the big events that tormented me. Every little act of selfishness, every harsh word, every look of contempt, all of it now weighed on me. I found myself ignoring a homeless person asking for help, passing up the chance to donate to a charity, silently mocking a coworker who made a mistake. But not everything was gloomy. I also saw the moments of kindness, however rare they were. The day I helped an elderly woman cross the street, the time I defended a bullying classmate at school, the Christmas I donated anonymously to a family in need. In those moments, I could feel the joy and gratitude of the people I helped, and a small light of hope shone in the darkness. However, the positive actions seemed to pale in comparison to the mountain of mistakes and missed opportunities. Each scene reinforced the feeling that I had wasted my life, that I had failed the most important test of all, being a decent human being. The review of my life did not follow a chronological order. He jumped from one moment to another, sometimes repeating particularly impactful scenes. It was as if some higher force was selecting the most crucial moments, the ones that truly defined who I was. At the end of this overwhelming experience, I felt completely naked. All the masks I wore, all the justifications I had created for my actions, all of that had been ripped away. He stood naked before the universe, with every flaw and every error exposed. The feeling of shame and regret was overwhelming. I wanted to go back, right every wrong, take advantage of every missed opportunity to do good. But I knew it was impossible. What was done was done. It was in this moment of absolute vulnerability and regret that the darkness around me seemed to intensify. My life review was over, but I knew my journey was far from over. What came next, I feared, would be even harder to bear. After the excruciating review of my life, I thought nothing could be worse. I was mistaken. What came next was an experience of doom so intense it defies adequate description. The darkness around me became even denser, if that was possible. It was not just the absence of light, but a living, pulsing darkness that seemed to suck away any trace of hope or comfort. The cold I felt was beyond anything I had ever experienced on Earth. It wasn't a physical cold, but a cold that penetrated to the soul, freezing any sense of love or kindness that might have survived the review of my life. In this place of absolute darkness, time ceased to exist. There was no past or future, just an eternal present of suffering. There was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. I was completely exposed, vulnerable to a force that seemed to know my every thought and flaw. The loneliness was overwhelming. I screamed, begged for help, for company, for anything that could alleviate that torment. But my screams were swallowed by the void, echoing only in my own tormented consciousness. I began to understand the true meaning of isolation, not just the absence of other people, but a state of total separation from all that is good and comforting in the universe. Regret for every mistake I made, every wasted opportunity to do good, every moment of selfishness or cruelty, all of it weighed on me with an unbearable force. It was as if every bad deed in my life had turned into a physical weight, crushing me under its load. I began to feel like this was my final punishment, my eternal destiny. The thought of spending eternity in this state of torment was more than I could bear. I desired total annihilation, the complete end of my existence, for anything would be preferable to this endless suffering. There were no visible flames, nor demons with tridents as in traditional representations of hell. That would have almost been a relief, something tangible to fight against. Instead, what I experienced was a total absence of light, of warmth, of hope, of love. It was as if my soul was being consumed not by fire, but by the very absence of all that is good. At times, I would catch glimpses of the people I had hurt in my life. I saw their faces, contorted in pain or disappointment, as a result of my actions. These visions were like stabs in my conscience, constant reminders of the harm I had caused and the good I had failed to do. The feeling that I deserved this punishment was overwhelming. Every fiber of my being screamed that I was unworthy of any redemption, that this was the just fate for someone who had lived such a selfish and empty life. The self-condemnation was as strong as the condemnation that seemed to come from the universe itself. In this state of absolute despair, I began to understand the true meaning of hell. It was not a physical place of torment, but a state of total separation from all that is good, pure and loving in the universe. It was the realization that I had, by my own choices, removed myself from any possibility of peace or happiness. How long I spent in this state of torment it is impossible to say. It could have been minutes or millennia. In that realm beyond time and space, such measurements were meaningless. All I knew was that every moment felt like an eternity of suffering. It was at this lowest point, when I had lost all hope and had resigned myself to an eternity of torment, that something unexpected happened. A light, so bright that it seemed impossible in the impenetrable darkness, began to form in the distance. It was as if the very fabric of reality was tearing apart, allowing a ray of hope to penetrate that realm of despair. This light, however distant and unlikely it seemed, brought with it the first spark of hope I had felt since the beginning of this terrifying journey. Little did I know that this light would mark the beginning of a new phase of my experience, one that would forever change my understanding of life, death, and the universe itself. In the deepest moment of my despair, when I had resigned myself to an eternity of torment and damnation, something extraordinary happened. A light, brighter than anything I had ever seen, began to form in the midst of the oppressive darkness. At first, it was just a tiny, barely noticeable dot, but it quickly began to grow, expanding like a slow-motion explosion. The darkness that enveloped me seemed to recede before this light, as if it were a physical substance being pushed away. As the light approached, I could feel its heat. It wasn't physical warmth, but a feeling of comfort and love that permeated every fiber of my being. It was as if every atom of my existence was being bathed in pure, benevolent energy. Then something even more incredible happened. In the center of this radiant light, a figure began to form. As it became clearer, I realized with amazement that I was looking at the face of Jesus Christ. He was not the Jesus of Renaissance paintings or Hollywood films. It was a presence so majestic, so filled with love and compassion, that no human representation could do it justice. His eyes, deep and gentle, seemed to contain all the wisdom of the universe. His face radiated a peace I had never experienced before. The most extraordinary thing was the feeling of unconditional love that emanated from him. It was a love so pure, so complete, that it made my heart hurt. I, who moments before felt completely unworthy and condemned, was now being enveloped by a love that transcended all human understanding. Jesus did not speak with words. There was no need. His gaze communicated more than any language could express. In that look, I saw understanding for all my suffering, compassion for my failures, and an invitation to redemption. I realized that he knew every detail of my life, every thought I ever had, every mistake I made. And yet his love for me was absolute and unconditional. There was no judgment in his eyes, just infinite love and an offer of forgiveness. I felt completely exposed before him, more naked than I had ever been. All the masks I wore in life, all the lies I told myself, all of that dissolved in the face of that divine presence. And yet, instead of feeling ashamed or afraid, I felt a deep acceptance. At that moment, I understood that I was being offered a choice. Jesus didn't speak, but I could clearly feel the message. I could accept his love, his forgiveness, and embark on a path of redemption. Or I could reject it and remain in the state of separation that I myself had created by my actions. The choice seemed obvious. Who, faced with so much love and acceptance, and would choose to return to the darkness? However, I felt a hesitation. Did I deserve this forgiveness? After everything I had done, all the people I had hurt, was it fair for me to be given this second chance? The weight of my mistakes, the vivid memory of all my failures, still weighed on me. Part of me wanted to run into the arms of that unconditional love, but another part of me felt unworthy of even looking into that light. It was in this moment of hesitation that something unexpected happened. A new presence was felt, a presence that would bring a new perspective to my journey and help me make the most important decision of my existence. As I struggled with my feelings of unworthiness in the face of Jesus' offer of love and forgiveness, a new presence manifested itself. Next to the radiant figure of Christ, a girl appeared. It appeared so suddenly and unexpectedly that for a moment I thought it was an illusion. The girl looked to be around 5 or 6 years old. She was standing on a small patch of lush green grass, a surreal contrast to the darkness that still loomed around her. His golden hair shone with a light of its own, and his blue eyes sparkled with a wisdom that went far beyond his youthful appearance. dressed in a simple white dress. She radiated an aura of purity and innocence. Her bare feet touched the grass softly, and flowers seemed to sprout where she stepped. It was as if she brought with her a piece of paradise to that dark kingdom. The most impressive thing was his smile. It was a smile of pure joy, without any trace of judgment or disapproval. Looking at her, I felt a wave of emotions that I couldn't fully understand. There was a familiarity about her that I couldn't explain, as if I knew her from somewhere, from some time I couldn't remember. The girl didn't speak, but her gaze was eloquent. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw a love that rivaled that which emanated from Jesus. But there was something more, something that touched me deeply. Forgiveness. In his eyes, I saw forgiveness for something I still didn't fully understand. Then, she did something that took me by surprise. She raised her small hand and waved at me, as if inviting me to join her in that piece of paradise. His gesture was so simple, so innocent, but it carried an emotional weight that I couldn't explain. At that moment, I felt something break inside me. All the walls I had erected, all the self-condemnation that kept me from accepting the love and forgiveness offered, began to crumble. The tears I didn't know I could shed in this spiritual form began to flow freely. The presence of this angelic girl brought a new dimension to my experience. She represented something that I couldn't fully understand, but that touched my soul in a deep and inexplicable way. As I looked at her, memories began to surface. Memories of a life that could have been, of a future that never came true. And then, like a bolt of understanding, I understood who she was. This girl was the daughter Evelyn and I never had. The child we decided not to bring into the world years ago, when we chose to have an abortion. The weight of this realization almost knocked me over. How could this child, whose life I had denied, be here, smiling at me with so much love and forgiveness? The guilt I felt was overwhelming. I remembered all the justifications I used at the time, that we weren't ready, that it would be a hindrance to our careers, that we couldn't handle the responsibility. Now, faced with this angelic vision, all these reasons seemed empty and selfish. But the most surprising thing was that there was no accusation in her eyes. There was no anger or resentment, just love, forgiveness, and hope. His smile and wave seemed to say, "It's okay. I understand. I forgive you." At that moment, I understood that the forgiveness she offered was not just for that specific decision, but for my entire life of selfishness and indifference. It was as if she was showing me that despite all my mistakes, there was still hope for me. The girl's silent invitation to join her in that piece of paradise was more than I could bear. I wanted to run to her, hug her, ask for forgiveness, tell her how sorry I was. But I still felt paralyzed by guilt and the feeling of not deserving such grace. It was then that I felt the presence of Jesus intensify. He didn't move, he didn't speak, but I could feel his love and compassion enveloping me, encouraging me. It was as if he was saying to me, "See, even those you believe you have harmed most deeply offer forgiveness. How can I offer less?" The combination of Jesus' unconditional love and the girl's innocent forgiveness was too much for me to resist. I felt the last barriers inside me break. The wall of self-condemnation I had built began to crumble. With a sob that seemed to come from the depths of my soul, I took a step toward the light, towards forgiveness, towards a second chance that I didn't know if I deserved, but that was being offered with so much love that I could no longer refuse. The moment I made that decision, the moment I accepted the forgiveness and love offered, something extraordinary happened. The light emanating from Jesus and the girl seemed to explode, enveloping everything around me. The darkness was completely banished, and I found myself immersed in a glow so intense it seemed impossible to bear. And then, as suddenly as it had all started, I felt a force pulling me back. The light, Jesus, the girl, everything began to dissolve around me. I tried to scream, to reach them, but it was too late. I was being dragged back to. The transition was abrupt and disorienting. One moment I was immersed in the brightest light I have ever experienced, surrounded by the unconditional love of Jesus and the forgiveness of the angelic girl. In the next instant, I was violently pulled back into my physical body. The feeling was like diving into ice-cold water after being in a scorching desert. Every nerve in my body seemed to scream in protest. My lungs burned, desperate for air. My eyes shot open, and the darkness of the room seemed strangely opaque after the intense light I had experienced. I sat up in bed with a start, panting and disoriented. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it echoing in my ears. I was drenched in sweat. My clothes stuck to my body as if I had been thrown into a swimming pool. It was then that the words came out of my mouth, before I could even process what I was saying. I feel God. I feel God. My voice was hoarse, almost unrecognizable to myself. The words felt strange in my mouth. I was always so skeptical of anything spiritual. But at that moment, it was the only truth I knew, the only thing that made sense. Beside me, Evelyn stirred, startled awake by my sudden outburst. She sat up, looking at me with a mixture of confusion and concern. "Finian, what happened? Are you okay?" I turned to her, my eyes wide, still trying to adjust to physical reality. How could I explain what had just happened? How could I put into words an experience that defied all logic and understanding? I died. Evelyn, I died and came back. The words came out choppy, between panting breaths. Evelyn turned on the lamp, and the sudden brightness made me blink rapidly. His face was pale, his eyes filled with worry. "What are you talking about, Finian? Was it a nightmare?" A nightmare? How could it be a nightmare? It had been more real than anything I'd ever experienced in my life. I shook my head vehemently. No, it wasn't a nightmare. It was real. I saw things. I experienced things. My voice cracked. How to explain the inexplicable? How do I describe the suffocating darkness, the painful review of my life, the overwhelming love of Jesus, the forgiveness of the angelic girl? It all felt so vivid, so present in my mind, but words seemed inadequate to express the depth of the experience. Evelyn put her hand on my forehead, probably checking to see if I had a fever. His touch brought me back to the present moment, grounding me in the physical reality that, just minutes ago, I had left behind. "You're freezing," she said, concern evident in her voice. "I'll get you a glass of water and a towel. Don't move." As she left the room, I sat on the bed, shaking. Not from the cold, but from the intensity of the experience he had just experienced. I looked down at my hands, turning them over before my eyes. They seemed both familiar and strange at the same time. I was back in my body, but I felt fundamentally changed. The reality of what had happened was beginning to set in. I had died, or almost died. I had experienced something beyond this life, something that challenged everything I believed I knew about existence. And now, he was back. When Evelyn returned with the water and towel, she found me still sitting in the same position, staring blankly into space. She sat down next to me, gently offering me the glass of water. "Finian, you're scaring me. What happened?" I looked at her, seeing her as if it were the first time. How many times had I neglected her? How many times had he ignored his needs, his feelings? The guilt and regret I felt during my experience came back with a vengeance. "Evelyn," I began, my voice shaking, "I need to tell you something. Something incredible happened. Something that changed everything. I don't know how to explain it, but I had a near-death experience." His eyes widened at the statement, a mixture of disbelief and concern crossing his face. But before she could say anything, I continued. "I know it sounds crazy. I can hardly believe it myself. But it was real, Evelyn. It was the realest thing I've ever experienced. And it changed everything. It changed who I am." As the words left my mouth, I knew they were true. Something fundamental had changed inside me. The person I was before I went to bed that night no longer existed. A new journey was beginning. a journey of transformation and spiritual discovery that I could barely comprehend. Evelyn looked at me with a mix of emotions: worry, confusion, maybe even a little fear. But there was something else in his eyes, something that gave me hope. Was it a spark of curiosity? Understanding? "Tell me," she said softly, holding my hand. "Tell me everything." And so, in the early hours of that morning, I began to narrate my extraordinary journey. Little did I know that this would be just the beginning of a profound transformation that would affect not only my life, but everyone around me. In the days and weeks following my near-death experience, my life underwent a radical transformation. It was as if I was seeing the world through new eyes, understanding reality in a completely different way. At first, Evelyn was skeptical and worried. She suggested that I see a doctor, fearing that my hallucination might be a symptom of a serious health problem. I agreed to have a full checkup, more to reassure her than because I believed there was anything physically wrong with me. The tests revealed nothing abnormal, except confirmation of my severe sleep apnea. The doctor insisted that I start using the CPAP machine immediately, which I agreed to without hesitation. The irony was not lost on me. What I had previously considered an inconvenience now seemed like a small price to pay for the chance to keep living. But the real change was happening internally. I started looking for answers to existential questions that I had always ignored. For the first time in my life, I felt an insatiable thirst for spiritual knowledge. I began reading the Bible, not as a historical or literary text, but as a guide for life. Jesus' words, which had previously seemed distant and irrelevant to me, now resonated deeply in my soul. I began attending a local church, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire to better understand the faith I had experienced so viscerally. My change in behavior did not go unnoticed at work. Colleagues noticed that I was more patient, more compassionate. I began to prioritize the needs of others above my own ambitions. My boss even asked me if I was okay, worried that my sudden lack of aggressiveness in business might be a sign of depression, but I had never felt so alive, so full of purpose. I started volunteering at a local shelter on the weekends. Every face I helped reminded me of the importance of living a life of service and compassion. The most significant change, however, was in my relationship with Evelyn. I started opening up to her in a way I never had before. I shared my fears, my hopes, my regrets. I asked for forgiveness for the years of emotional neglect, promising to be the husband she deserved. At first, Evelyn was wary of my sudden transformation. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks turned into months, she began to see that the change was genuine and lasting. Our relationship has blossomed in ways I never thought possible. But there was one issue that continued to torment me. The angelic girl I had seen during my experience, his presence, his forgiveness, continued to haunt me. I knew who she was, but I couldn't find peace with this revelation. It was during a particularly intense night of prayer that understanding finally came. Tears ran down my face as I begged for guidance, for understanding. And then, like a whisper in my soul, came the answer. The girl was not just the daughter Evelyn and I had chosen not to have. She was a symbol of all the missed opportunities, of all the what-ifs of my life. His forgiveness wasn't just for the miscarriage, but for all the times I had chosen selfishness over love, indifference over compassion. She represented divine grace, the unconditional forgiveness that was offered to me despite all my faults. With this understanding came a peace I had never known. It was not a peace that erased regret or minimized past mistakes, but a peace that allowed me to accept forgiveness and move forward, determined to live a life of love and service. I shared this revelation with Evelyn, fearing her reaction. To my surprise, she cried with me, admitting that she too was carrying the weight of that decision. Together, we decided to honor the memory of that unborn child, not with guilt, but with a renewed commitment to love and compassion. We began considering adoption, feeling a calling to provide a home for a child in need. It was our way of transforming the pain of the past into hope for the future. Today, 5 years after my near-death experience, I look back and barely recognize the man I was. The transformation was not easy or instantaneous. There were days of doubt, times when the old Finian threatened to resurface. But the memory of that night, the unconditional love I experienced, always brought me back on track. Evelyn and I adopted a 6-year-old girl, Sophia. She brought joy to our lives that I never imagined possible. Her every smile reminds me of the angelic girl I saw that night, and reinforces my commitment to living a life of love and service. I left my corporate job and now work at a nonprofit that helps people with sleep problems. I use my personal experience to warn about the dangers of untreated sleep apnea and to offer hope to those struggling with similar problems. My faith has become the center of my life, not as a set of rules to follow, but as a living relationship with a loving God. I share my story with anyone who will listen, not to convert, but to offer hope and a different perspective on life and death. I still have many unanswered questions. There are days when I wonder if all this really happened, or if it was just a vivid dream caused by lack of oxygen. But then I remember the feeling of absolute love I experienced, the peace I found, and I know in my heart that it was real. My near-death experience taught me that life is precious and brief. Every day is an opportunity to make a difference, to show love, to seek forgiveness. I've learned that no matter how far we've gone in the wrong direction, there's always a chance for change. There's always hope. By sharing my story, I hope others can find comfort and perhaps even inspiration. I don't know what the future holds, or what really awaits us after death, but I know I will live each day with gratitude, love, and a renewed sense of purpose. My journey beyond life has taught me the true essence of living, and for that, I will be eternally grateful. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.